What are your fondest memories of your travel? I'm sure there are a few that cross your mind. Now think about the number of times you traveled on vacation or for work in the entire year, maybe before 2020. And since how many years you've been doing that? With so much travel, why the memories are so less? Do you ask yourself an important question? That is, why we travel? Hi, I'm Prashant, a learning enthusiast, and you are listening to the Relearning Podcast. And today I have Utsav Mamoria, who shall help us to relearn why we travel. Utsav is a market researcher by profession who enjoys incorporating behavior science in his work, a student of psychology and neuroscience. Most importantly, just like most of us, he loves traveling, rather slow traveling. And he has his own podcast titled as Postcards from Nowhere, where he shares his experience about so many interactions and experiences with the locals on his slow travel expeditions. Welcome to the show, Utsav.
Thank you, Prashant. Very excited to be here.
Superb. Uh, First things first, and I think just before this, I shared this with you. Postcards from Nowhere is such a beautiful journey that you take us through. And with listeners, I will also share a right way of listening to Postcards from Nowhere, but probably after some time.
Okay, I'm very curious to hear what is the right way of listening to postcards from nowhere. So this
Oh,
is
I shall.
interesting for me as well.
Oh, I shall. I shall. So, first things first, and this has been one question I'm sure everybody is itching to ask, is that everyone thinks of taking a vacation and they also do it. But
Yeah,
you took a vacation for 3 months. I'm
yeah,
not sure if vacation is the right word,
yeah. So I mean, I think the better word for this is sabbatical.
right?
And yeah, I did take a 3 month sabbatical. This was back in 2018, and I think that is probably one of the fondest memories of my last decade is
Right.
having those 3 months to myself and being able to travel the way I've always wanted to without having to worry about work, without having to worry about anything else, right? And it's literally apart from very very broad milestones in that travel, I
Hmm.
was choosing my destinations as I went along, right? So it was literally that I love good guidebooks. So I go before I go for a vacation. I pick up a guidebook. I read the entire guidebook before I go,
Wow.
right? And this is that I feel that okay, if 2 days I liked here, maybe I want to stay one more day. I stay one more day. Then I look at the map and say, okay, this place looks interesting. Let's go here next, right? And
Interesting.
that kind of travel is really difficult to get these days, right? Because we always little short on time and so
Yeah.
on and so
Yeah.
forth. Yeah.
Like a
So yeah,
like a
that is
marketing
yeah.
guy, if I ask you that sabbatical of 3 months, so what would be your opening line to an email that you would send? Like, 3 months, so many countries, so many kilometers. What would that look like?
Yeah. So I mean, if I were to say it, it would be 3 months,
Uh-huh.
uh, three countries, a month in Bosnia Herzegovina, a month in Georgia and Armenia, and a month living in a one-room cottage in the Himalayas. With all I had was a light bulb and a bookshelf and a bed
Wow.
to live with. So yeah, that would be my trailer or my copy if I were to call out my sabbatical.
Sorry, I had stopped you to ask this, but yeah, sure. Please go on. You were sharing about how did you how do you plan how did you go about this?
So my entire thing was that I wanted to take a sabbatical for a specific reason. Of course, traveling was one, no doubt about it.
Sure.
But I also wanted to collate my travel writings over the last 10 years. Right, I've been traveling since about 2008, 9 is where I remember I took my first trip by myself and started traveling really seriously. And I had a lot of stories, within me sitting there.
Yeah.
At the same time I wanted to also experience new things and write about them as well. And I read a lot of travel writing, and one thing which I've always found missing in travel writing is the fact that the people don't end up exploring a lot of negative emotions when you come to travel writing. It's always, oh my god, this place is amazing, oh my god, such a wonderful experience, which
Hashtag
it is most of
wanderlust.
the times. Hashtag wanderlust
Yeah.
is which is also an overabused term in this
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
industry,
True.
right? So the idea was that I also wanted to write at the intersection of emotions and travel,
Nice.
right? And what I did was that I and I'm because I work in behavioral research, right?
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time understanding emotions, right? And the idea was to unravel emotions which are not spoken about from a travel perspective. So, for example, when I talk about fear,
Uh-huh.
right, there is intrinsic fear and there is extrinsic fear. Extrinsic fear is basically going to an unknown place. You don't know what you're going to
Right.
encounter, right? And I still have that after so many years of traveling, right? Sometimes I do have that extrinsic fear. Okay, I'm going to this country which most people don't go to. What's going to
Uh-huh.
happen, and so on. And the other is intrinsic fear, right? Your own insecurities, right? Your own worries about how you're going to manage and will you be able to tackle things or not, and so on and so forth, right? So that's not explored. Aging as an idea, right, which is which
Hmm.
is which is something which you all have to deal with, right? So I wrote about aging while I was there, right? And why do we fear aging so much as a species when we know that it is inevitable? It is, and we all know that
Nice.
someday we are all of us going to die, right? And what is the psychological basis of worrying about aging so much? And of course, I realized this when I was hiking in to the most remote village of Bosnia Herzegovina,
Uh-huh.
and I met a couple who were kind enough to guide me because they were regular hikers.
Right.
And I was with a guy who was hiking maybe twice as fast as me. Okay, and I'm not fit, right? So that that's no benchmark of good hiking, but he was very very fast across
Yeah.
those mountains,
Yeah.
right? And I started chatting with him, and then I realized that he's 50 years old.
Wow.
Okay, and I was like, what the hell am I doing with my life? And what the hell is he doing with his life that he's so good, right? And,
Mhm.
and this talking to him made me realize that he had such a different life. For example, he used to hike for 3 hours every day. He used to come back from work at 6, and in the summers, of course, the days are longer in Europe,
Uh-huh.
right? So he used to go from anywhere between 5:30 to 8:30. He used to hike every day, right? And that was a
Wow.
part of his life. Like it was not something which he wanted to do on weekends or on chutti. That's
Wow.
pretty much like how maybe
Matlab,
you and I take a shower or something like that.
exactly.
So
Interesting. And he's giving you run for money, literally.
yeah,
There.
literally. And I think what that really taught me, and I think not taught me as much as reinforced for me, was that there are 1,000 ways to live life, right? And unfortunately, we are all taught to live life in a certain way, virtue of being from India. That you have to follow a certain career path and life path also.
Yeah.
That get a better bachelor's, preferably in engineering or medicine, get a master's, right? Get married, have kids. All of those are choices, by the way, right? You don't absolutely have to do them, right? For
Yeah.
example, the couple I had met, right? They were seeing each other, right? And they did not, they may or may not marry ever, right?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
fact that they were still together, and I think that mattered a lot more than the act of signing onto a paper and agreeing that you are married or not.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
yeah.
yeah, I think that was one great point. So again, I'm coming back to aging, right? That was
Sure.
an idea of exploring aging, right? As an idea. Then I'm also looking at understanding doubt
Hmm.
or self doubt, right? For example, I mean, I was hitchhiking across Bosnia
Hmm.
to reach that village because there was no public bus to get there, right? And
Right.
see, I understand that I have some advantages that first of all, I'm being a man. There's a certain advantage I always will
Sure.
carry in terms of safety, right? But still, I mean, I'm in an unknown country. I don't speak one word of Bosnian,
Yeah.
right? So hitchhiking and getting somewhere, was also challenging because I don't know whether should I stop this car, should I not stop this car. So
You're
and it's an
just
amazing
reading
game, right? As a
expressions, huh?
hitchhiker, yeah. So it's an amazing game. You see the car coming.
Huh.
You are trying to gauge the driver. The driver is also
Huh.
trying to gauge you at the same time,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Known
So and
corner.
you are thinking known corner, right? So the thing is that you try to. One thing which I've realized, having spectacles is a big boon because people
Ah.
automatically assume you are non-threatening,
Let me just
right?
write that down. First. Okay. Sure.
Right. Then it's important that you make sure your backpack is on you. You have a guidebook in your hand. You just look a lot more non-threatening. You just look like someone who is come for traveling and does not have any nefarious agenda.
Hmm.
Trying to get into your car and murder you and take all your money,
True.
right? And the great part, what I've felt, and maybe it is just from being privileged coming as a man, is that people are so much more trusting, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I had to change 3 vehicles to get to where I wanted to, right? And in the last part of the journey, the family which gave me a ride took a 7 kilometer detour just to
Oh,
drop me to the village I wanted to go to,
wow.
right?
Where do you do
And
this? I mean, how do you get these
yeah,
people, man?
and,
Yeah.
and and this is the thing, right? I mean, when there is so much polarization in the world right
Yeah.
now, right? It feels really good to just make a human to human connection without expecting anything in return, right? So it's not that I have the family's phone number or email, I'm in touch. It was just one of those things you meet,
Yeah.
and you do something for someone selflessly, which they did for me. And I've always ensured that I pass that on whenever I am traveling, making sure that because I think that is the circle of virtue which we need to create in this world.
In so much time that you've spoken so much, Utsav, every statement has got me some memory of the postcards from nowhere episode. So let me get this right. You have a from ticket, that is India, or I'm not sure, are you from Bombay,
Yeah,
Bangalore,
India,
right?
Bombay. Yeah.
From there to first location, do you and you
Hmm.
have a return ticket, or do
So
you also
yes and
have
no.
those as well?
I have some tickets in between. So,
Okay,
for example, my trip to Bosnia was a 1 month trip, right? So
okay,
I had my tickets in, and I flew into Germany because getting a Schengen visa is much easier than getting a Bosnian visa,
okay.
and a Schengen visa works in Bosnia. So it's more a practical decision than anything else. And I also happened to, by the way, when I was in Germany, I went to Stuttgart to meet two friends who I met while I was hiking in Indonesia. They were Germans, and
Uh-huh.
I went and stayed with them,
Nice.
right? So that also became an additional motivation for me to fly through Germany vis-a-vis probably flying through France or some other country, right? And from there I went to Bosnia, spent a month in Bosnia Herzegovina, and then came back, and then took a flight back to India, right?
Okay.
uh, then what I did was, then I stayed for a couple of days, and then I flew to Armenia, right?
Hmm.
And which was actually quite easy to fly to from Delhi. By the way, it's a fairly straightforward
Yeah.
way. You fly from Bombay or Delhi to Dubai, and then you can take a connecting flight and fly Dubai, right? And I reached in Armenia, spent about 3 weeks in Armenia, spent about a week in Georgia, right? And then I came back to India, and then I booked my last leg, which was my trip to Himachal, right? The idea was to just spend time by yourself, living with very very basic needs,
Oh, Himachal happened
right?
at the
And
end, right?
Himachal up at the end because I knew that that was the time where I would not
Collect
be
your
moving
thoughts.
around much,
Yeah.
collect my thoughts, and But what I also did was I kept writing through the trip,
Yeah.
because what happens with writing is that to me, you have to first capture that moment when you are feeling it,
Hmm.
right? You can
Yeah.
always edit it,
Hmm.
right? But if you don't capture that feeling at that point in time, sometimes you lose the essence of what you have felt, right? And the
Nice.
importance and the advantage of slow traveling comes into play here because, for example, I felt something. I had no pressing need to go and see two other things on that same day, right?
Hmm.
I felt something. I said, okay, I am happy. I want to write about what I have felt right now,
Nice.
right? Rather than worrying about I need to tick off X number of places in my list, right? And then, of course, a lot of editing and the collation of a lot of stuff happened while I was in Himachal, right? And I also wanted to experiment with that kind of living.
Hmm.
That can I really survive with the very basics,
Did you?
right? Actually, yeah, quite comfortably, I must say, right?
You were
And
well
I think
prepared
that,
for the pandemic.
yeah, clearly. And I think the advantage which I definitely had was the fact that there was no other way out of it, right? So if you ended up in that village, right, you had to go down 2 hours into Manali
Huh.
if you wanted to access proper civilization comforts.
Oh.
Okay, for example, yeah, I went in August. This was in August, and it was of course raining once in a while. So if I had to have warm water,
Hmm.
they had a very unique stove which used to work only on firewood,
Okay.
right? Right, and which essentially meant that it was not about switching a geyser and you have hot water in two
Hmm.
minutes.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
It essentially means that you have to wait half an hour for 45 minutes to get
Yeah.
okay. So what
Hold on. Yeah.
happens is that when you go into those kind of places, and when you, for example, when I had to eat something, when they used to ask me, so I had a cottage, and a little about 100 meters from the cottage was this old couple who used to run the dhaba, and I used
Hmm.
to go and eat there, right?
Hmm.
And they used to ask me, what do you want to eat? So one day I said, I just want to eat aloo gobi. A very
Correct.
simple thing, right? So she said, okay. She picks out aloo and gobi from her farm, right, and
Nice.
makes it for me. And I'm like, this is literally farm to table. What we talk about,
Wow.
right? And so everything in those terms was slow, right? So for example, I could see the amount of effort they were taking to prepare for the winter, right? For example, the
Okay.
cows gave milk, right? So they would curdle that milk and make some sort of something like a paneer, which can be
Yeah.
stored for a very long time,
Yeah.
right? Because you know that for maybe 4 to 5 months in a year, nothing is going to grow. you
Hmm.
have to you have to pretty much live on whatever you have stored, right? Now what happens is when you start seeing that pattern of life, you realize that a lot of things which you need are not what you need. It's just what you want, which you have converted into a need,
That is true.
right? So
We.
what
Yeah.
happened there was that I mean, I had my Kindle. I had some physical books also, right? And I could very easily spend 6 to 8 hours a day just reading or writing and doing nothing at all, right?
Nice.
I could just spend 2 hours a day just taking walks around in the mountain at my own pace, no hurry to, climb a mountain in a certain time and come back by sunset. If I say, okay, if I start at 4 in the afternoon, I have 2 hours and only walk for 2 hours. If I
Hmm.
start earlier in the day, I'll do that,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? And I think what's happened is that our expectation from life has become everything needs to happen here and now, right? What we are forgetting is that life doesn't really work on that time scale and time pace, right? Our expectations, unfortunately, are far, far ahead of the pace which life functions at,
Yeah.
right? And to me, that was a very, very big change in my head, because it sort of made me realize that I don't really need that many things, right? And I mean, it was somewhere there in my mind, but I think it's got really crystallized to me at that point in time, because I could see the life people were living and they were happy by means. I mean, I'm not saying that they were
Exactly.
unhappy. They were quite happy with their lives. I'm
Yeah.
not saying their life did not have struggles. I'm not trying to romanticize mountain life. It is difficult. It is difficult to live in the mountains for a long period of time, but they were doing it quite well. And the uncle and auntie I was living with, I mean, they were in the 70s, and probably one of them was in the 80s, and they
Yeah.
were so fit, right? And this is a theme which continually came back, that if you
See,
choose to live a different life, you can have a very different body and mind experience.
yeah, and that's the thing, right? Their focus is not fitness, by the way. Their focus is survival.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Fitness is an absolute byproduct of their way of living.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Nice. You spoke of aging, you spoke of doubt, and you gave examples. You didn't speak about fear. Did you experience or encounter any? I'm sure there are stories there as well where
Yeah. So for
you're scared
me,
for life.
I was luckily I did not face any sort of life-threatening fear in that trip,
Uh-huh.
but I have faced it in the past. So, for example, this is way back in 2009, 9, 10. I was in Colombia in South America. I
Uh-huh.
had gone for an academic conference, and what happened there was we landed on the way back. I also made a small detour to Ecuador. On the way back from Colombia to India, we had to spend one night. So I was with my professor,
Hmm.
and we had to spend one night. And those were not the times where bookings were that easy as they are
Okay.
now digitally, right? So we ended up in a Airbnb kind of a place,
Uh-huh.
which happened to be in the drug district of Bogota.
Oh,
Okay, and in the
thanks
night we
to
heard gunshots.
thanks to the series Bogota is very famous. You heard gunshots, you said.
Yes, we heard gunshots in the night. Okay,
Okay.
and that of course scared the shit out of us. And I also remember that the guy who got us there from the airport,
Uh-huh.
right? It was his own setup where he used to live, and he said that when we came in, and he said that you're not going to step out until I ask you to step out, and when you have to go for dinner, I will take you. Okay, and that felt
Okay.
like such a weird thing to get from
Ha
someone,
ha
right?
ha. Exactly.
Okay, okay, right. And then he took us out, and he's like, "What do you want to have? You have pizza?" We're like, "Yeah, we'll have pizza." Okay, and we're sitting and talking to him, and then he suddenly flips out his phone, and he said, "I want to show you something." And I was like, "What is he going to?" So he starts showing pictures of his family, his daughter, the vacation he took with his family, and then suddenly started feeling, okay, this guy's not crazy, right? And then we realized later in the night that he was
Uh-huh.
actually looking out for us.
Oklahoma. Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah,
that's
right,
his customary being,
correct,
Atiti Devo Bhava.
right.
Yeah,
And the thing is, the moment he started talking about his family and everything, it just felt like, okay, this guy is normal,
normal. Huh.
right? So there is a reason why he's doing this, and of
Yeah.
course that became very clear in the night. But I was genuinely scared, that point in time. Once I genuinely felt fear in I was in Argentina. This is 2016, if I'm not wrong, and we were hiking Mount Aconcagua in the Andes,
Uh-huh.
right? So that is the highest mountain in the whole of Andes, but we were only going to the base camp,
Okay.
right? Because I mean, we were not prepared to go there. And this was in December, which is peak of summer in Argentina, because the
Okay.
southern hemisphere. So we went thinking it's a summer hike, and luckily we had some foresight that we should take a guide, even though it's a very well marked trail and pretty much most people do it themselves. And we reached at the top. The weather changed. We got stuck in a snowstorm.
Oh.
Okay, and none of us were prepared with clothing for a snowstorm because it was a summer hike. So we did have some of it, of course. We did have one or couple of layers, but it was getting cold. And one of our friends, her body was losing heat very quickly. So we actually had to abandon the hike, maybe just 15 minutes away from the point because
Uh-huh.
the guide said that hypothermia could set in if we don't
Yeah.
get back quickly, right? So one, that was on our mind. Second,
Wow.
when we were coming back, because the snowstorm was a freak thing, there were a lot of the shepherds and animals which were grazing. The animals also got panicky, and
Yeah.
there was a point where there was a herd of horses. We were One of my friends was charging in the path. I was a little away from him. The herd of horses were literally charging at us
Oh,
because they were coming downhill and they were not able to control their speed,
control.
and of
Yeah.
course being freaked out, right? And the guide literally came in at the last second. He did some motion and which made them go a different direction.
Oh boy.
Otherwise, for sure, my friend would have been very badly hurt, right?
Yeah.
And we were three and a half hours from the base of that mountain, right? And even at the base, there was very basic medical facilities, right? They were not like hospitals, and at least the next hospital was probably 3 to 4 hours away,
I'm sure.
right? So that is the time where I've genuinely felt that how things can go terribly, terribly wrong, right? And I felt that fear
Hmm.
once for myself and once for my friends.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
yeah, that does happen also.
Wow.
So
I mean, yes, that is fear. That so thank you for sharing that itself. Uh, okay, now this is interesting, right? How and you and me both are living a corporate life. How does that work at office? I'm talking about the getting that approval for 3 months,
hmm,
or how does this sabbatical get planned?
okay. So I think the first thing you need to think about when you take a sabbatical is one, that you have to be very clear that why you're taking a sabbatical.
Hmm.
Okay, because you have to know your reasons precisely, because if you cannot convince yourself, you
Yeah.
will not convince anyone else. That's the first step. The second step which you need to think about is that you cannot be too fussy about the time you want to take it for, right? So you have to find that balance between what works for your team and your job
Yeah.
and what works for you, right? So
Hmm.
for example, if you absolutely want to see the cherry blossoms in Japan, right, there's only a certain time you can go,
Right.
right?
Right.
However, if you want to take the kind of trip which I did, it doesn't really matter much, maybe beyond maybe 1 or 2 months in the year, where you can pretty much go anytime,
Hmm.
right? That's the second thing. The third thing is that you should ensure that you are amongst the best performing people in your team, right? Because let's face it, all these privileges are not offered to everyone.
Yep. That is true.
Yeah. The fourth thing you need to be sure that you need to be clear of your end game. If you absolutely have to and want to go, and the organization absolutely says no, you should be saying that, okay, if this is what you want, I think we will have to diverge paths right now,
Hmm.
right? Which means
Nice.
that you may
Hmm.
want to give up that job.
Correct.
My sense is, especially if you're taking a 3 month sabbatical, most companies will logically think from a point of view that if tomorrow I leave, you're going to get a new person, onboard them. 3 months will anyways go in that space. And
True.
that person is not really contributing 100% because he or she just come into that job, right? So to me, I think you have to be clear of your reasons. You have to be also in a good position in your organization. When I say
Yep.
position, not designation, but like in a good comfort space,
Yeah.
in that your work and what you do is valued and you are valued, right? And it's possible to get that. Having said that, it's not possible in all companies. I think,
Yeah.
which is where, and maybe Prashant, you will agree with me more than anyone else, that culture matters a lot, the kind of
Totally.
place you join to,
Yeah.
right? And to me, I'm very clear now that if whenever I move next time, my job, I will look for culture before money and before my work profile and everything, because that defines so many aspects of your life, right? For example, I'll say this proudly that I know I work at InMobi, and InMobi has a sabbatical policy which most Indian organizations don't even
Nice.
have,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? For example, but they say that a month, a year into the organization, you are allowed to take a sabbatical,
As a
right?
policy,
As a
it's not
policy, as
even
a
an
written
option.
policy,
Oh, nice. Nice.
right?
Wow.
I mean, of course, you can choose not to exercise it, which is
Yeah.
your choice, right? But it's an option, which means if I table it tomorrow,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
not out
Hmm.
of the blue that, okay, what is this and why is this request coming in? I think what also happens is that most organizations don't make good examples of people who've taken a sabbatical and come back. I think it's
That's a
also
good point.
important to celebrate those
Correct.
people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If we
Yeah.
celebrate achievers all the time, why are we also not celebrating people who choose to take a conscious break from something
Hmm.
to achieve a personal goal, right? And it could be anything. It could be learning a musical instrument. It could be traveling, like I was writing in my case,
Yeah.
right? And they come successfully transition back into the job they were doing, right?
Very
I think
interesting,
that's
right?
also important to celebrate as an organization.
If you know what you first thing is knowing what you want to do, with anything. In your case, it's travel. Probably in my case, it's the podcast. Then do it. Do certain steps around it.
Yeah,
That'll
exactly.
ensure your routine works. You are energized to do those things that you're supposed to do. Interesting. And thank you for sharing that. Anything else that you want to add to the list? So you're saying why are you taking sabbatical is important. Don't be fuzzy about the time that you're taking. Check the team. What are the right ways that it's going to be working. Be the
Yeah,
best performer, and that's a very interesting thing that you picked up, because if you are that best performer, things would be comparatively easier for you to get and fetch while taking something
yeah.
like this as a request.
I
And
want
no,
to add one more point.
uh,
Sorry, Prashant.
sure.
Here is, and again, I think as someone who you will appreciate this also, is that if you are at least a mid-level or slightly more senior in the organization,
Mhm.
also try preparing a transition plan,
Yeah,
right? Because what else will happen is that, see, no one's going to get hired just because you're away for 3 months.
correct.
Your work is going to get redistributed, right? So you need to ensure that what is your redistribution plan. At least you should have one, and of course, it can be modified and discussed
Yeah,
as you get into the sabbatical, and you should also have a transition plan once you come back, and
interesting.
then you'll pick up all of those things. I think
In,
the reason why, I'll tell you why this is important, is that one, it tells the organization, the signaling to the organization is this person is not being frivolous about this entire thing,
exactly. Yeah.
right? This is a very thought through thing, and it's taken into consideration that there are challenges at work and things which need to get done in your
Hmm.
absence.
Nice. So basically, I'll put this, if I have to categorize this, I'll put this in end game, because your end game you mentioned one, be prepared to walk off. That is one.
Yeah,
Second, give alternates. So have these options ready. And I know I'm into sales training, so we always have those plan A, plan B, plan C for the
scenarios.
customer. And yeah, exactly. Keep those scenarios handy and be prepared with it. So basically, this is the iceberg, right? Your sabbatical is far-fetched. So how much time did you take to plan this? A
So for
3 month sabbatical?
planning,
Yeah,
so thing is there are two types aspects of planning. One is financial planning, which is very
that
important.
was my next question, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So see, financial planning, it took me about 2 years, right? Because
Okay.
I needed to save this money beyond my regular savings, which I do for my
Obviously.
investments and for the
Right.
future, right?
Right. Right.
So this was over and above that. And it was not that while I was planning for this for 2 years, I did not travel otherwise. Of course I did. That's what I
Yeah.
really like to do.
Yeah.
So, I had to, of course, cut a few corners in terms of my expenses, right? And that's a whole different discussion of how to save for it. But it took me 2 years to save. I think in terms of planning, given the tools at our hand right now for
Mm-hmm.
planning travel, I think it's very, very easy. I think it took me less than 15, 20 days to map out the entire thing. Right. And I think the only thing which took a little time was to find that one place in Himachal where I wanted to stay for a month with a very simple way of living. And that took a little time. And thankfully, a friend of mine suggested a place. He knew of,
Okay.
he had been there.
Uh,
And when I saw it and I read about it, I'm like, this is the place. There's no
Perfect.
need to look any further. So, yeah.
Let me go back to the money topic.
Yeah.
Something like 3 months away, and sabbatical, by the way, doesn't mean that you get your money as well in your
Yeah. Yeah.
in
No.
terms of
I
your
mean,
monthly
in
salary, right?
some organizations, by the way, do pay,
You do get some,
but
yeah.
most don't,
Most
most
don't.
don't end up paying.
Yeah. So this is very interesting. What it reinforces is that money wise, this is literally like you have to be true to yourself in that that is something that you really want to do. Then
Yeah.
all this will fall in place, that okay, I'll put
Correct.
that as a priority and put the money aside for it and cut few
Hmm.
corners. So that's an interesting one. So it's not, it's, you have to be really with that thought, like
Yes.
James Cameron making Avatar for 14 years, where we complete a theology and become a father or a brother, something of that sort. You have to be true to
Yeah.
that thought. It should mean that much to you. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
so I think I want to call out one thing here, and maybe I'm an outlier in this, that don't take an EMI for something that does not appreciate, right? It's okay to take an EMI for a loan, education loan. I think it's okay because it probably gives you a return on investment. It's okay to probably take an EMI for a property which you hope will appreciate over time, right? But buying things, taking a vacation, don't take an EMI, because I'll tell you why. Simply because you will feel amazing at the end of the vacation, right? But the moment you come back and start paying your EMIs, it's going to hit you really bad, right?
That
One,
that's profound. Yeah.
it's going to be there, right? Secondly, it's not wise financially to do it,
Yeah.
right? And by the way, I mean, I'm not saying that that I'm really well off. I just planned that very, very smartly. And let me just remind you that I was living in Bombay, so for the 3 months I was away, I was still paying rent for my
And
house.
Bombay rent. Star mark.
Bombay rent.
Yeah.
Yeah, star mark Bombay rent, right? So it
Fair.
was not that I had suddenly, cut down my expenses, or I was living at my own place, so I didn't have to pay rent and my costs were low, right? I still had to even budget for that while I
Hmm.
was away. Right now, I just probably go in this couple of great ways to save money.
Hmm.
First is delete any app which makes you do any impulse buying, whether it is shopping, whether it is ordering food, right? Trust me, the amount of money which we unconsciously spend on these things is a lot,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not much of a shopper, but I love to eat,
Hmm.
right? And just by cutting down a little bit on going out, for example, if on a weekend I would usually go out Saturday and Sunday,
Hmm.
right? I just decide, okay, I'll only go one day instead of going 2 days,
Right.
and one day I'll just have friends over, or I'll go to someone's place, and something like that, right? That itself made such a huge difference, because that will save you a few thousands every month,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? If you enjoy drink, I don't drink much, but if you enjoy drinking, drink at home, don't drink outside. The
Hmm.
cost is massively different,
True.
right? You
Yep.
end up
Yep.
paying 2 to 3 times of what you would pay for the same thing, right? And I understand the two different experiences, drinking at home versus going to a nice place to drink, but the fact is that you're achieving towards a goal, right? So it's okay to cut down on that, at least for the time being.
I have one addition. I heard it on one of the podcast.
Sure.
Have that bottle of water which you picked. I literally searched that.
Oh
The
yeah.
one which you mentioned in, and of course it was your podcast. I'm just, uh, I forgot the name, but I looked it up, and I also
Yeah.
kept it for ordering because, yeah. Why don't you go ahead and explain? Because that
Yeah,
is
yeah. So
one thing I realized
yeah,
later.
yeah. So the idea is that the idea is very simple, that uh, when we travel, we actually don't realize how much we spend on bottled water,
Hmm.
right? And I did a back of the envelope calculation. I must, if I had not taken that bottle of water, which I'll come to,
Yeah.
I would have spent at least 10 to 12,000 rupees just on bottled water, right? And there are two
Right.
challenges. One, it is extremely wasteful to buy bottled water, because
Yeah.
a lot of it is single-use plastic, right? So we're
Right.
definitely not helping our planet by using that. Second, which happens is that in most places, the water you get is fairly drinkable,
Hmm.
right? And I'm not talking about going to the Western world, right? Even in the places where you go to, right? For example, this is one of my favorite hacks while traveling is I never pay for bottled water at the airport, right?
Huh.
You go to any cafe,
Huh.
you ask
Yes.
them nicely, please fill up my bottle of water.
Yeah.
They will do it for you, right? And you save $200 for unnecessarily paying for 1 liter of water, which makes no sense in my opinion.
After that episode, Utsav, you have saved me some money. I owe you some.
Yes, it's called Life Straw.
Live straw. Perfect.
Yeah. So
And I've
Life Straw is something
recommended
you can,
that
by
as
the
well.
way, order off Amazon. And
Right.
what it simply does is you can fill water from anywhere, and you can just fill it a Life Straw and drink it through it. And it's good for 10,000 liters of water, which, if you think of it, if you actually end up consuming 3 liters of water every day as a person, and if you travel for one entire year and use that, it's going to last you that long, right? Which
Hmm.
means that in a realistic time frame, it's going to last you a few years at least, no matter how
Nice.
much you're traveling, right? And it's cost you like 1,000 to 1,200 bucks or something. So in my opinion, it's a fantastic return on investment, while also ensuring that we are not killing our planet any further than we already are.
Another interesting fact that I recall and I love it is that wherever you travel, you, of course, on most of the occasions you mentioned that you when you have your partner with you, you love the Marriott and the all the JW Marriotts and the five stars. But when you're traveling alone, especially, you love hostels.
Yeah, so
And
it's an interesting
yeah,
thing that my partner has also now come over to my side.
okay, that's a
Yeah.
good
So
transition.
basically, yeah. So basically, this was happening in Jordan, and we are on our
Yeah,
honeymoon. So we had booked the Marriott in Petra
yeah.
for, I think, 1 or 2 nights, and I wanted to go to a Bedouin camp, right?
Hmm,
Like where the Bedouins,
hmm,
make food for you and they take care of you and everything. And so I said, that, okay, let's stay one night in the Bedouin camp, and if we don't like it, we always have the Marriott, like, to have the comforts for it. Okay.
hmm.
And we both of us ended up loving the Bedouin camp experience so much, because it was so much more warm and genuine, right? And I remember this very vividly, that we were at least 25 kilometers into the desert, right, in this place called Little Petra, and we were staying in the Bedouin camp, and Um, in the middle of the desert, they arranged a cake for us,
Wow.
right? Because they knew we were on our honeymoon,
Uh-huh.
right? And the interesting part was that typically you would expect a five-star to do all this, right? If
Exactly.
they know that, oh yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
that was so much more genuine and warm.
Huh.
And we were able to talk to them.
Nice.
They actually roasted coffee and ground coffee right in front of us in the fire. And
Nice.
they made coffee for us. They're telling us about the rituals of Bedouin drinking and
Hmm.
so on. And that was so much more of a personal and experience which we liked, which I've always felt that hotels cannot give. And I'm not trying to diss on the hotels industry, because I know hospitality is a really tough business to be in,
Yeah.
both for the people who run it and the people who work in that business. But you are basically getting a standardized level of service,
What you're
right?
talking about
And
is warmth, actually, right?
yeah,
That
yeah,
that that, that
that
that's the
human touch.
experience. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's why hostels also I like, because it's so easy to, like, for example, how often do you see people talking in a hotel lobby versus
Huh,
a
huh.
hostel common room?
Correct,
Right,
correct.
the vibe is very different, right? I
Very.
will think three times before talking to someone in a hotel lobby, right? But I will not think as much before to talk to someone in a hostel dorm room or common area, right? And that's what makes it interesting. You hear what other people have done, you get in their recommendations of
Yeah,
what was great, right? And
yeah.
that really helps.
So that's what I wanted to check. That if you do this, there are two more benefits, right? One is a guy in the hostel will definitely tell you 10 tips about how do you save and what are the right ways to do.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? That is one. Second, he will tell you things which are off the map, off the guidebook.
yeah,
Has this
certainly,
happened with you
certainly.
that you planned for something and you went to this hostel and something changed entirely?
Yeah, many times. For example, this entire hike which we went to the Andes
Uh-huh.
was not something which we even had planned.
Okay.
So we ended up in this region called Mendoza of Argentina, which is the wine region, right?
Okay.
And I like wine, so my friends also do. So we said, okay, we'll probably go to a couple of vineyards, do some wine tasting, maybe buy a bottle or so. And but we had 3-4 days there.
Uh-huh.
So we went to the hostel, and they said, why don't you try this hike, right? And if you want, we'll arrange a guide for you. This is the cost of it and everything, right? And they also said that if you don't want to take our guide, we will still give you a map. We'll also give you directions of how to go, right? So you can do that as well. So there was no
Yeah.
unnecessary selling which was happening also, right? They're
Uh-huh.
like, we
Huh.
can do what we want to do.
Right.
We chose to take a guide because I don't know, thank God we did. I don't know why we did, but we
Huh.
did, right? And that was the great part, right? So it's not that the guidebook will not mention it, but it will be in some part of the guidebook which is not really called out, oh, this is a great experience, right? But that's what they said, that this is recommended because everyone we have sent there has come back saying that it was a great place to hike.
Okay.
And it was, by the way. I mean, if the snowstorm hadn't hit, it was a great hike through and through.
I'm
At least for
sure.
the first 3-4 hours, it was amazing. So, and the amazing thing which I found there was I found fossils of sea animals on that mountain, and I was
Ah.
completely flabbergasted. And I asked my guide. He said that these fossils must have found millions of years ago, and as the
Yeah.
tectonic plates came
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
everything shifted. Right now, I have heard of this. It's not that I didn't know that happens, but to see it
See it. Yeah.
firsthand is something, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not mentioned in any guidebook. No guidebook mentions that you
Ah.
can see fossils of millions of years old. And I'm like, big deal, dude.
Ah.
So,
Nice.
those kind of things happen so often that I think I have probably forgotten about them. I just take it as a part of my travel now.
Nice. 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 Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Slow travel in itself is so interesting, and the word slow. Literally, I'm talking to you. I just went back to say the word slow, and I mean, I'm sure you go out with your friends even now, and
Yeah.
they would have an agenda of 10 things to do in that day, right? How does that work? Does that conflict with you, or they have? How does that work for you?
Okay. So, I think one thing which you should be clear is that the overlap between friends and the people you can travel with is not perfect.
Hmm.
There are some people who are great as friends, but your travel philosophies don't match. And I don't think that's anything wrong with it,
Yeah.
right? And I think in my case now, thanks to my sabbatical and my podcast, people know the kind of travel I like to do,
Hmm.
right? And I have a few friends who very much like to travel like that. That's one part of it, right?
Yeah.
So even then, what happens is you will have diverging interests,
Hmm.
right? So I think what you should be also okay with, and I think that also comes with a little bit of age and maturity, is that there may be some part of the trip where you might want to do different things.
Hmm.
You don't have to do it together.
Yeah.
For example, in Argentina itself, I had gone with a couple of friends, and those two wanted to go to a certain mountain
Right.
on one day, and I wanted to go to a national park. So for that day, we went our different ways,
Right. Hmm.
right? So I think that's something which is manageable, right? And it's a bit of a give and take. That okay, for example, I remember that we were eating meat for the longest time in those 8 9 days in Argentina, and I was
Huh,
craving something else, and then my friends found a sushi place,
huh,
and I'm like okay about sushi. I'm not big on it, or
huh,
I don't
huh.
dislike it or anything. Okay, and they were like, "Let's go," and I was like, "Okay, well, let's go. Why not?" They're saying it turned out to be fantastic, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I think there's a lot of upside to it also while
yeah, yeah,
doing
yeah.
what your friends want to do sometimes. Yeah.
You just explained marriage and relationship to me, man.
Oh, yeah, that's actually true. That's way to think
It's true.
about it.
It's true. So when when exactly was that moment, right, Utsav, that you felt that, I mean, in all resumes, you'll see that, I love traveling, I like reading books, and I like singing and dancing. When did that
Yes.
become from off the resume that the kind of travel? I'm sure you have witnessed a travel for a couple of years. We go here, we do these things, and we come back. When did you realize that, you have to change this a little, or what
I
happened?
think
Changed.
I think to me a lot of things changed when I took a trip to Meghalaya and
Ah,
Indonesia, and I know that they don't go together at all, but I'll tell you
huh.
why. It simply happened because I was making a trip to Meghalaya, and then I saw on Air Asia that a flight from Calcutta to Yogyakarta was some 13,000 rupees return. Okay, and
Okay.
I was like, this is ridiculously cheap not to buy.
Huh.
Okay,
Nice.
so I cut short my trip to Meghalaya by a week, and I said, okay, let me also go to Indonesia because in Yogyakarta, from and so Indonesia falls under the Pacific Ring of Fire, so there are a lot of volcanoes,
Right.
and I've always been fascinated by volcanoes, and I wanted to climb a couple of them and see, peer down the crater
Huh,
and
huh,
see
huh.
how it looks from inside. So I did that, and what happened during these two trips was that I did not have an agenda per se,
Huh.
right? The only agenda which I had for Meghalaya was to see the living root bridges,
Hmm. Hmm.
which, by the way, if someone has not heard of, please look them up. They are fascinating
Yeah.
in every way you can think of, and it's very unique to India. By the way, I think I have not heard of any kind of thing like that outside of the world, outside of India. And in Indonesia, my only thing was to climb two mountains, Mount Bromo and Mount Ijen.
Ah.
Okay. Now, what that did for me was that because I was so unencumbered or with trying to do too many things, I was able to enjoy things at the pace I wanted. So, for
Nice.
example, I went down to the Living Root Beaches, and it's about 3,000 steps down, and I'm not fit. So, I realized that because I have so much time, might as well stay one day down at the village itself,
Nice.
right? And that freedom of choosing what you like to do in that moment is what really, really, made me think that this is the way we should be traveling,
Yeah.
right? Because, and this, I have mentioned this numerous times, is that the world is too big for you to see. You are not going to see everything,
Hmm.
right? But see whatever you are seeing, see it with that intensity that you remember it for the rest of your life, right? That you have those memories which you can replay 10, 20, 30 years, tell stories like I'm telling on this podcast. I tell to my friends, maybe I'll tell to my nephew when he grows up, right? Do that because that's what going to give you joy, right? Experiences, the advantage of experiences over things always is that experiences can be played back multiple times in your head, right? But the feeling of buying a new car can only come so many times in life.
True. Wow. That I'm gonna play this in loop for a couple of times now. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, now let's come back to the right way of listening to your podcast. So, of course, if you're listening to postcards from nowhere, it's perfect podcast to know Utsav and his experiences. But the right way of listening to that is first is by the way, you've appeared third time as well on Simplified now, or how many times? I've
Yeah, I
lost
think
the
three
recent
times now. Three
three times
times.
now. So
Yeah.
listen to the first episode of Simplified on IVM podcast where Utsav features for the first time. I think this was before the sabbatical,
Yeah, this is market
right?
research when I was talking
Market
about what I
research,
do.
right?
Yeah.
Then second, listen to Cyrus Says episode where Utsav is featured, and then listen to again Simplified where he's come back from his sabbatical and all the travel and he shares his experience. After these three episodes, go to the first episode of Postcards from Nowhere. This is like Star Wars, man. I just explained the sequence.
I'm also a little worried that people are like, इसका podcast सुनने के लिए बहुत मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी.
बहुत
पहले
मेहनत
तीन
है.
चार podcast करने पड़ेंगे.
See, if you want goosebumps of every episode from Postcards from Nowhere, do this. It's worth your effort and time. That's for
Thank you,
sure.
Prashant. You're very kind.
All right, no, superb. And I so anything else that you want to add about your experiences? Because after this, we're gonna go to the different round.
No, I think the most important thing I would say
Yeah.
that anyone you are traveling, whether you're traveling slow, fast, super slow, hyper speed, whatever you are traveling,
Hmm.
just make sure you're going to places you are interested in, vis-a-vis
Hmm.
what is marketed to you. I think that is very, very important.
Aha, lovely.
I'll tell you why. So, for example, like a lot of people would love to go to Universal Studios, right? I'm not into that
Okay.
personally, right? So while I will go, I'm sure I will like it because
Yeah.
I'm sure it's pretty amazing. But I don't think I will likely remember it for very long
Hmm.
because I was not invested in that experience, right?
Nice.
And I understand that taking a sabbatical is a lot of privilege. You know, taking time off for a longer time is a lot of privilege. But even if you are going for, let's say, 3 days a week, do things which you want to do because you will definitely remember it, right? And it's okay if it doesn't make for the best stories, but it'll definitely make for the best memories.
That's a great tip. Now let's move on to the next section. It's a rapid fire round. Uh,
Okay,
you don't win any hamper. That's the I don't
damn
know
it.
what kind of how do I place it. I
I
have
understand how podcasting works. I understand there is no money in podcasting.
no, no, fair enough. But a promise that whenever we meet, wherever we meet, the coffee is on me or whichever drink that you have is on
Done.
me. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you. First thing, if you could do time travel, which era would you go and why?
If I would go to want to go time travel, I would go to the Renaissance in Europe. I'm big into architecture and art. So when the Europe moved from the Dark Ages
Hmm.
to the Renaissance period, right, where all these
Oh,
artists were flourishing, and suddenly Europe had this age of enlightenment, where arts and the culture came at the fore of it. I would love to be in that time because I would have actually, and because I knew what the work is
yeah,
right
yeah.
now, I could have actually gone and spoken to these people when they were nobodies,
Nice.
right? I would have loved to go talk to Vincent van Gogh or a Picasso or someone who built the Duomo in Florence, right? I would love to go talk to those people. So I think that would be my number one time travel thing.
Very interesting. Good. Okay. Second one. When are you? What is in next for you? Where are you traveling next?
Okay, so my company has announced a work from home till June 2021,
Nice.
right? And I mean, since we anyways working remotely for the last 8 9 months, my wife and I were looking to move to Himachal for 2 to 3 months and work from there.
Nice.
So the idea is that while we will continue to work on the weekdays, weekends we'll have completely to ourselves and walk around, move around, eat some good food, breathe some fresh air,
Oh yes.
live in the mountains. Very very important. So that's definitely on the cards. Apart from
Nice.
that,
Yep.
we are also discussing multiple places. So we are thinking of a trip to somewhere in Europe. We are thinking of either Romania or Croatia. I am very gung ho about going to Tajikistan. I've heard wonderful things about the place. So that's on my list. So yeah, I think decided. They're always between her, and she also loves traveling. So
So that's
between her
another
and I, we're always.
sabbatical in the way.
It might be part of it may be sabbatical.
Uh-huh.
And one more thing which we are discussing is getting a digital nomad visa. A few countries have started offering that,
Huh.
and you can continue to work with your day job, right,
Oh,
and live in that country,
I didn't know this.
right?
Digital
Yeah.
nomad
So, for
visa.
example, Portugal has this D7 visa, which is a long term visa.
Okay.
Thailand is offering it.
Nice.
Georgia was planning to offer it. I don't know if it's offered or not. So there are about 5 6 countries who have offered it, right? And some of
Nice.
them are fairly easy to get. Like the only thing which I think you need to take care of is that you don't go in a very very different time zone. Otherwise, you will be screwed
Hmm.
because you still have to work to your time zone back in India. But anything which is under 3 hours, I think is quite manageable in terms of working.
Okay. Your recommendation for a podcast, movie, or a book?
Okay, so many. So the a podcast recommendation, and I will of course bias towards travel podcast recommendations,
Yeah.
is this podcast called Into the Wild.
Into the
Uh,
wild.
it's 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 run by this guy called Chris Morgan out of Seattle,
Uh-huh.
and he talks about his experiences of with animals and stories about animals and human interactions,
Uh-huh.
right? And it's a whole sweep of the environment, the ecology, animals, and so on. It's a very different kind of content, but it's very, very good content. I think I've heard every single episode that's ever been released on that podcast.
Okay.
So that's one recommendation I give. The other recommendation is Overheard by National Geographic. Um, okay, it's an interesting podcast. It's a very interesting thing in how National Geographic brings about different stories.
Uh-huh.
If someone's interested in how different cultures are and how different people live and behave, there's this wonderful podcast by NPR called Rough Translation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's nice.
so that's one I really like. Okay, I think movies not so much. I'm not that much into watching video content in
Of
general, so I'm
course,
not.
you ditched Universal Studios. That's okay. That's
Yes.
sure.
True, and but I would, rather than books, I would probably recommend some authors which I
Ah,
have pretty much liked whatever I've read. So one of them is Robert McFarlane, right? Who writes about places. A lot of his writing is focused towards England, where he is from. But I think the way he approaches things, like one of my favorite books of his is called Mountains of the Mind, right?
okay.
And one of the central questions he answers is that why do we climb mountains as humans? Right?
Hmm.
It's fascinating of how he explores this whole thing, and he's been a climber himself, so that of course adds
Why do
value
we
to it.
climb mountains, by the way? Why do you do it?
Multiple. So I do it multiple reasons. One is to have a sense of accomplishment. I think that is one of the big drivers, because
Hmm.
for someone who's unfit, it's a sense of accomplishment, right? The genuineness and the niceness of people in the mountains has blown
Ha,
me
ha, ha.
every
That is
single
true.
time in India, in the Himalayas,
That is true.
right?
That is
It's
true.
just so nice, and I've always found them to be very, very content. In fact, I remember I did one of
That
these
is true.
episodes called "Satisfaction versus Happiness,"
Hmm.
and the thing is that we think happiness is giving us satisfaction, but actually satisfaction gives us happiness. We've got the equation wrong completely. So yeah,
Nice.
I mean, Robert McFarlane is one person I would definitely recommend. The other person I like is Pico Iyer. He's a little more mainstream, I think, in terms of travel writing, but
Uh,
some of the stuff he's written is just going to blow you away,
yeah.
right? And the other author I recommend is Barry Lopez,
Uh,
right? He's been probably traveling for 50 years,
yeah.
so he's well into his 70s, and in fact, I have a book right now with me. It's called Horizon,
Uh-huh.
right? And it's a massive book, right? But it's about his experiences of travel over the last 50 years or
Nice.
something, and it's wonderful. I mean, some of the lines which he has written resonate so much with me as a traveler
Hmm.
that I'm like, I have felt this what he's saying right now.
Yeah.
So those are the recommendations on authors.
And there's a book coming as well, very
Yes.
shortly. Yeah. I think there are two books, if I'm not mistaken.
No, there's only going to be one. So actually, there were plans for three. One
Okay.
didn't end up, which one ended up being the entire China series
Right.
on the podcast. And the other one is Monastery in a Minefield, which needs to be edited now, and I think it's high time I get to it. It's
Awesome.
fully written, it's just not edited. And there is a third one which I have not announced abhi tak, because I need some time to first finish this one and then get on to that one. But to me,
Superb.
that idea is will still be relevant 2 years later if I write it.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
So it's a different take on travel. So yeah, let's see where we get with that.
Wow. Last question and the most important one. Why we travel?
I think to me, fundamentally, if I were to ultimately, all travel is self-discovery,
Mhm.
right? You discover yourself through what you discover outside, right?
Nice.
Because what interests you when you go and see something tells you more about yourself than it tells you about the place or the thing you saw,
Wow.
right? So to me, I'm not saying that every time I've traveled, I have got dawned upon some amazing piece of wisdom or insight. But to me, it's a very slow moving, emergent, complex process that multiple small experiences then build towards something which you strongly feel about. So, for example, I have realized that I have a very, very strong attraction to architecture.
Mhm.
Okay. I've done a lot of episodes where I talk about,
Yeah.
buildings, temples, and so on and so forth. Now, to me, that what it tells me fundamentally is that I value something aesthetically if I know that there has been a lot of effort and hard work which has gone into it.
Nice.
Okay. And I know that because I value perseverance as a very, very important thing in life,
Mhm.
personally. Like, I genuinely believe perseverance is more important than talent.
Hmm. Interesting.
Okay. Now it's debatable. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that
Sure.
is how I feel.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So, for example, when we say that something is exotic, it's exotic because you miss it at home.
Hmm. Correct. Yeah.
Right. Similarly, what appeals to you is something which is you have not realized about yourself.
Hmm.
So, to me, fundamentally, why we travel is a self-discovery.
Awesome. I don't think there could be a better end to the episode than this. Thank you so much, Utsav, for sharing this time,
Thank you,
sharing
Prashant. Had a
so
good
much
time
wisdom.
talking to you.
I literally feel that we should do this every week. Forget the releasing of episode or not, but there's so much to take from you. All right, so thank you so much. Thank you, listeners. I'll ensure that I write Utsav's contact details, social media handles in the description below. Do check out his podcast, Postcards from Nowhere. Thank you so much, Utsav. This is enriching for me, and I'm sure for the listeners as well.
Thank you so much, Prashant, for having me.